Hello everyone and welcome along to our webinar this evening, Movement Fundamentals, Developing Skills for Rugby Union. I'd just like to thank the Coaching Association of Canada for their continued support in the NCCP that we deliver with Rugby Canada. Before I hand you across to Richard, I would just like to make us aware of some features that we have with the control panel that we'll use throughout the webinar. There is the option for you to use the chat and the questions box. There will be points throughout the presentation where Richard has allowed time for those questions to be asked. And throughout the presentation, we'd encourage you to be as interactive as possible and ask some questions in the questions box or the chat option. There's also handouts for you that you're able to download the content that Richard is going to be going through, so you can look at those slides at a later date, but obviously we'll be going through the slides live with Richard as well. So before I hand it across to Richard, please enjoy the webinar and also be as interactive as possible using the questions and chat option. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it across to Richard.
Thank you, Paul, and good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for signing on to the second of these webinars for Rugby Canada, and appreciate all the support that's been received for this new approach to coach education. So thank you very much. Like Paul says, there's opportunities for questions. There's actually an interactive part which I've put in for the first time, and at the end of it, there's some further links which you can look at to follow up from tonight's presentation. So this is the approach for tonight. 4 areas surrounding the centre, which is ultimately what difference we're trying to make. So what are the fundamentals? Why are they important? What does the research tell us? And that's important in itself, because what we're always trying to do is validate our approach to coaching. So this is why we're doing it. It isn't a hot topic. It's a richly supported research debate that says that these are the reasons we need to do it this way. Areas for effective implementation, and ultimately the difference that we want to try and make as coaches. So the first picture you can see, 2007, I was part of a group of rugby players actually that climbed Kilimanjaro. Sadly, altitude got the better of me and I didn't make the final stage. But this picture on the left is of one of our porters, and the picture on the right is the terrain that he was following. Had come down that and was about to climb the next stage. Made me think, how do you get to that level of expertise? How do you get a level of stability, strength, functional strength? Where does that come from? When we went to the village that was at the base of the mountain on our way out, we had a greater understanding why. The young children were replicating what you see at a very early age. So specific functional training, and the gentleman there has got about 20 kilograms on his head, carrying it for pretty much most of the day without any seeming deficiency in how he could cope with that. The reason I got that picture is just to give you an idea that a lot of it is, my approach tonight is that our movement skills are the product of the environment which we come from. When you look at the movement skills, or fundamental movement skills, these are the 3 pillars: locomotion, which is your movement of running, hopping, and leaping; manipulation, push, pull, catching; and stabilization, rotating, turning, and landing, and balancing from those 3 different elements. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the language I present tonight is beneficial to coaches, that they can go out tomorrow, the day after, weekend, and put this into practice with some real applied practice. One of the things that I think coaches need to do is to be aware of the potential for having to sell the benefits of this to the parents who are watching, to the players who are taking part, to other coaches, because your sessions may look different. They may have a different focus. They may have activities that from an untrained eye think, well, why are we doing this? this will become clear through the presentation. When you click onto the ice skate on the right, this is a film I saw in a wonderful film festival, the Banff Film Festival that travels around the world. 7 films. One of the films was a film called Edges, and this is the story of a 92-year-old figure skater, and it just talks about the skills that she picked up when she first started skating and how they've really carried on right the way through her life. So when we're developing and enhancing movement skills for our players, we're not just doing it for the momentary time that they are playing rugby. We're doing it so those skills will benefit them throughout life. And I really believe that, you know, coaching has got to have impact in terms of immediacy. This is what we can do now, it's what we can change. But movement skills are very much, you're giving those balance, coordination skills that they will take not just in the rugby field but outside. So that film just indicates to me that the 90-year-old ice skater had a very good grounding, very good foundation in those movement skills. So why should you develop a wide movement vocabulary in your players? Very short analogy. If you've thought about traveling through Italy, you might have limitations if your words you know and understand are, can you tell me where the railway station is, can I order a drink and what's the time? That's a very limited vocabulary. Give you limited confidence, limited movement through the country. You know, you don't really expand the potential you've got by being able to engage in that language. So I very much thought about our movement vocabulary is a bit like the vocabulary in a second language. The more we learn, the deeper that becomes second nature, the greater potential we've got. So think about that movement vocabulary and giving your players a broad vocabulary that if it was a language, it would enable them to travel further, have a wider reach, and engage more, in this instance in Italy, in the country that you're traveling through. So can we develop a wide movement vocabulary in the players that we coach? One of the challenges I set myself when I first started doing the workshops in an applied practice session for the local county rugby conference was to say, we mustn't have a rugby session and a fundamental session. The higher level is strength and conditioning coaches. You can probably isolate those movements in very set strength and conditioning programs. In general, most of the rugby coaches have limited time, amateur rugby, community-based coaching. So the really important thing is we don't think they're two separate things and the coach say, well, I haven't got time to do that. The thing is, can we integrate a movement vocabulary into everything we do? So I set myself a bingo challenge. And I got the coaches to have the list of words that you got in front of you and to watch a warm-up session that I delivered. And I said, when you see these movements take place, tick it off. And my challenge is to make sure that the 11 movements you see in front of you will all take place in the 15-minute warm-up. I won't isolate them. They'll be integrated and there will be rugby-specific movements, but I will make sure that that warm-up is a learning opportunity, is a development opportunity, a preparation opportunity, and I can integrate all of these activities in the session. So the challenge for coaches, and it might be something you will think about, is how can I ensure that the focus of my warm-up, the lens that I look through, has these movement skills integrated in them. So I thought about functional training and functional movement. Train the movement, develop it, take it to a next level. Guide, so it isn't just about saying these are the movements we're going to do. There has to be an element of corrective practice as you would do with any skill. What does balance mean? What does it look like? What does footwork look like? Coordination, ensuring that that guidance through those movements, you know, it's a taught skill rather than just saying, right, we're going to do these skills and not give that feedback. Challenge means stretch players. If it's balance, if it's jump, land on 2 feet, can we jump, land on 1 foot? Can we jump, land on 1 foot and move into something? That's the challenge. It's about always pushing it to the next level. So this is an example. In the last webinar, I talked about a skills audit, looking at the skills required for a sport, listing them down as an audit and think, right, what do I need to become good at this sport? The picture you see is a session I did with a para canoeist up in Scotland. They transfer from rowing to canoeing, and I wanted to. We spent the morning in the boat on the water. Within about sort of half an hour, the Hope, who's the canoeist, you can see, capsized. So obviously the thing that stood out was balance, and so we took the deficiency, that the area we wanted to work on, into the gym, and we spent a lot of time on balance. So what we tried to develop here, you can see a Swiss ball and a Bosu. We tried to challenge the balance progressively, and I said, how unstable can we make you? The gentleman on the left, the coach, is throwing tennis balls at Hope, and the idea is that that stimulus will represent the arms coming up, as the arm would be up and one would be down, simulating the paddle. So challenging that balance by changing center of gravity, changing the movement. Does the movement of the arms affect the balance? So we spent a lot of time thinking about how we can improve those functional movement and those movement skills, and just keep on making that environment more and more challenging. The first session we did was Hope was just sat on the floor catching tennis balls, and we progressed up to this. A month afterwards, those balance skills in the boat were much better. So we really looked at not the technical skills of canoeing, we looked at the foundations of the skill that would enable her to become a better canoeist. I had a class coaching seminar last week, and we were talking about backyard games with a skills coach, Rick Shuttleworth, who you may have heard of, and why children nowadays have lesser movement skills that people did maybe 20, 30 years ago. We spoke about backyard games, the opportunity to get out into the environment, to challenge yourself, and just do those skills that you can, let your children go out the front door into an environment and climb trees, ride bikes, go into woods, get all those kind of skills and confidence that we had, certainly had when I was younger. And I was at a festival yesterday, and this is my daughter on the left with a plank of wood, and as you can see, a log. Half an hour, just challenging herself, surfing, snowboarding, trying not to fall off, throwing and catching tennis balls, real basic foundation of movement skills. But the half an hour we spent was really challenging. On the left-hand side, that free access to the woods, building, playing, climbing trees. And this is where the movement skills, that's the origins. That's not just what we as coaches will put into our sessions, but it's the ones that children can freely do in their own time. The next slide, which is a cartoon image of an urban environment. We now live in certainly, I'm not quite sure where everybody's listening to, the environments that they grew up in or where they live now, but we're living in an increasingly urbanized environment. Children can't spontaneously go out from their front door to play. Backyard games, we might live in an apartment near a busy road. So we've got to be aware that the previous photographs are not ones that are representative of the environments that we grew up in or are growing up in now. And so what that means is that we have greater emphasis as a coach to say that when those children and adolescents and senior players, whatever the age group, arrive at our sessions, that we have greater obligation, greater need, greater requirement to make sure that we cover the areas where they're deficient. This is the time we work on those fundamentals that you haven't been able to do for the rest of the week in the sessions that you're doing or at school or in your own playtime. So it's about saying covering that deficiency. Now, a quick question. I talk a lot in my work about a dynamic learning environment, forever changing, forever challenging. So we have an indoor climbing centre, have a rugby pitch, and we have Lee Valley Park, which is north of London, which is where the Olympics were held for the slalom canoeing. And really, when to spot the difference, there should be no difference. Obviously, one's on water, one's indoors, one's a rugby pitch. But what I want coaches to try and do is to think about, how can I really make the environment that I create challenging, dynamic, moving? If you look at somebody on the water, that water is that great variable. It's forever challenging the guy in the boat to make sure they can adjust their movements, perform the skill. The rock climbing, challenging, different heights, different reaches. But the rugby pitch has to have its own dynamics that replicate the dynamics we see in the games when we watch them on television or from the sideline. So they're no different. They're only different by what you see on the picture, but not different in the concept of what we're trying to create. So when you think about the sessions you deliver, the sessions you've been to, what does dynamic mean? It should be challenging in lots of different ways. We spoke last time about deliberate practice, that intensity of that practice. So I did my own research. These are my students. The next slide after this you're going to see, which is going to be about where research is. The top left, it's a game we play called musical chairs, without music. So as you remove an invisible chair, the students have to then collaborate. So they go from sitting on an imaginary chair to binding on with somebody else to form a two-man sofa, binding on to somebody else to form a three-man sofa. We've got a front row. What I learned from that picture and the picture to the right, which is an indoor trampoline centre called Flip Out, and from the bottom picture, which is a game called Balloon Waterfalls, which requires all the people you can see to keep the balloons up in the air. There's lots of reaching, stretching, movement, coordination, decision making. And the right hand side, just access to a children's playground, exploring, going through tunnels, climbing on the climbing bars. It made me realize that across all of those students I taught, which is about 80 in total across the 3 years, that there was a great range of difference in those movement skills. And it showed me, and once I spoke to them about their sporting backgrounds and their education backgrounds, that some of them didn't have the richness of focus on movement skills as others. And that was clear, really clear in the top right with the trampoline center, the skills that some could do and others couldn't or wouldn't want to do. And I thought, actually, it's not too late to encourage them to develop those, but there is a missed opportunity to an early age. And this is really why we want to ensure that the vocabulary of movement skills that we deliver in junior and youth rugby and then reinforce all the way through is so important. So just a little activity to get coaches to understand the importance. So I've done this a few times. It's a simple activity just to stand on one leg with your non-standing leg 45 degrees behind you, to reach forward and to undo your shoelaces, and then to reach forward and do your shoelaces up, and then to change legs. Just work from one side to the other. I don't say a lot. I ask the question, what did you notice? And there's normally quite a light-hearted session about people struggling to stand on one leg, cheating in some instances, putting their non-standing leg down just to give that little bit of corrective balance. And it highlights in the group the simple act of being a single leg balance activity can be quite challenging. And the idea is for them to understand that the most basic skills of balance is something we all struggle with, and how important it is that we need to pay attention to those skills right the way through. I'd half thought of asking everybody who's logged on to practice this in the break to step back from the computer, put a shoe with laces on and just try it. But maybe it's something you can do as some homework I'll set you. But it does highlight within a group the strength in one leg over another, sometimes from injuries, the dominance in one side over the other. The challenge is to maintain that balance on a simple activity, and how that could restrict us going forwards. So I think I might mention at the beginning about just ensuring that when we talk to coaches and the coach looks across and says, well, why are you doing this? Your session looks slightly different. They're not looking, it isn't looking like rugby. It's lots of challenges. Parents might be looking and saying, what are you doing this particular activity for? I mean, hopefully you've had that dialogue before they start, so they know what to expect and why you're doing it. But this particular article highlighted 4 things. The adolescents entering the first year after leaving primary education, so these children are 10, 11 years old, didn't demonstrate skill proficiency across 9 selected fundamental movement skills. So those early years, those primary education years, 4 to 11, when you go from infant school to junior school, so primary years, something happened in those years which was missing. Something was lost. And of course, when you get to that post-primary age and you go into, in the UK we call it secondary education, 11 years old onwards, what chance is there to catch up on that? What chance do you get to then revisit those skills and get better at them? Well, as you can see for the next one, the problem you've got is the deficiencies at the early age. When they get to more challenging activities later on, it's a challenge to move on to more advanced sports skills, that they're almost lagging behind. It's not the technical knowledge, it's the technical proficiency supported with those foundational movement skills. We're asking people to, going back to the picture, we're asking people to travel through a country without that vocabulary that's going to help them progress. So as coaches, just like the picture of the urban environment, structure and implement developmentally appropriate activities with continuous opportunities for practice available. It's an ongoing. A coach once said to me, you don't clean your teeth in FAD. You don't clean your teeth for 3 months of the year and leave it for the rest of the 9 months of the year. You don't do it in FAD. You do it all the time. And it's the same with movement skills. Movement skills are like cleaning your teeth. It's something you should try and do as an ongoing daily basis. Make it part of your coaching, because the realization that I had with some of the coaches I worked with and the children and adolescents young adults who came to them was that, hang on a minute, we're making an assumption that they can do this, realizing that they couldn't. An under 16s county session, the amount of people who couldn't jump, the great range of people who could do a jump correct it, and the other ones who couldn't. So making an assumption they can do that and saying to the coaches, listen, you just need to make your sessions ongoing, continually challenge, continually reinforce. And the final one, if deficiency is not identified in early age, children may experience lifelong problems with movement skills. So this going back to the ice skater. What are we going to look like when we're sort of 35, 40, 45, 50? We want to have the skills that we've grasped at an early age right the way through our life. So there are 3 opportunities for questions, and I've put on there my Twitter account. At the bottom is my email account. Appreciate Rugby Canada and Paul will also be able to be contacted for further information. But just chance now to, whilst you're doing your shoelaces up, to feel free to send some questions in, which I'll deal with. So this is the first kind of break, and I'm happy to take any questions rated on the first part.
So, Richard, I have a couple of questions here, but if people can keep writing their questions. There was one just regarding slide 7, where developing a movement vocabulary.
Yeah.
Are those motions in particular some of the basic movements that should be focused on? Or are there other movements that are equally or more important?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that I probably need to reinforce is what I did was I study the game a lot. I just watch how people move, and I wanted to do something that was realistic, that we could reach out. I mean, there's lots of things going on. There's catching, passing, jumping, catching, accelerating, slowing down, sidestepping, falling backwards, falling forwards, running backwards. So there's plenty of movements going on. What I did was I looked at the movement skills that we had at the beginning. I just go back here. The locomotion, manipulation, stabilization. And I thought, okay, how could I turn that into a menu that is a bit easier to read, one that is more applied, if you like? So yes, yeah, Paul, that isn't a definitive list. Absolutely, dodge, evasion. There's other ones, but I just thought that would be a good starting point. And I still think these are from my belief of rugby, these are some of the real pillars of those movement skills.
So we've got a couple of more questions here. So a comment with a question. I think the hardest thing is to be brave with this. Too often coaches replicate how they were taught, not what is best for the athletes. How would you suggest changing the mindset of skeptical coaches in relation to this FMS?
Yeah, well, if you go back in history, if we didn't, if we all thought of medicine the same way, we'd still be having leeches on our skin to cure diseases, because people have continually challenged what had been done before, and medicine progresses and coaching should progress. It's what we're trying to say is just because it's done in the past doesn't mean it's how we should do it now. We've got a game that is quicker, players that are professional players now that are stronger. The environment is much more dynamic through rule changes. We've got sevens. We have to be more aware of where the game is going. And we also have to be more aware, as we show in this previous slide, of what our audience is like. We've got an obligation to be reactive to those children who come to our sessions, as adults who come to our sessions. I really appreciate that question. And I think young coaches who may feel a little bit isolated in a group where others are doing what you could say are more traditional ones, to be fearful of trying something new. But bravery doesn't mean going from 0 to 100. Bravery can be one small change, modifying your warm-up, throwing in a small-sided game with conditioning it, say, okay, right, we're going to do 4v4 in a grid, and we're going to condition it so that every time you pass the ball, you got to roll on the floor before you can come back in the game. Okay, so roll on the floor, you've been tackled, get back up. So you're immediately challenging that player's ability to go to ground, come back up in a stable position, and then move into the next phase and support the game. So the players, if it's a 4v4, and they're down on the floor, it goes right back into 4v4. You're not out in the game for very long. So, I really have a lot of empathy with that question, because I challenged it a lot. I looked to my peers and saw what they were doing, but it didn't sit with me. It didn't sit with the needs of the players, the needs of the game. And you're right, it is brave. And with bravery comes that feeling of being vulnerable. What if I make a mistake? What will it look like? So I'd say, if you really think that's important to you, And the slides I'm showing are trying to give you ideas that this isn't a faddish approach to it. This is saying, okay, over the time, I'm going to drip feed in small changes, condition the game, one-handed offloads, pass the ball on. You can only pass the ball in a small side again on one leg. Whatever it is, just a small change can make a huge difference.
Perfect. I've got a couple more, but we'll go one more and then I'll park some for later. What would be the right order, if there is a right order, to work with a rugby athlete? Balance, dynamics, skills.
Okay, that's a really good question in terms of, is there an order? Is there a process we go through developmentally? You can look at your ABCs, agility, balance, coordination. You can look at the list you've got. The way I work is two things. I push all the skills out there. You saw the warm-up. I throw all of the skills in that session, and I just stand back and I look and I pick out areas of deficiency. A simple game I would play where players would all be given a ball, roll on the floor, back up, who's first up and who's stable, and just look at how players move up from on the ground to standing. Pressure games, in other words, reduce the space, look at people's ability to avoid contact and agility. So within swimming teaching, if you're looking at coaching a new group of swimmers for the first time, you allow them to do the full stroke. You look at the full stroke and you observe areas of technique that need to be improved. Look at the whole stroke. So from that position of order, I'd say, let's just go back. It's going to be a little bit slow when I go back to this here. Okay. Provide a session where you give a player an opportunity to do all of these 11 skills. Set a border. So we're going to do some acceleration, deceleration in a 5-meter grid, 4-meter grid, 10-meter grid. Okay, run towards the line that is a boundary on that square and see if you can play a game of chickens. How late is it you can slow down before you stop without going outside the line? Those kind of things. And what you're looking at is just your observations of where the skill deficiencies are. And for me, one of the things that stood out was I didn't have an order. I threw the whole menu at people. And when I mentioned about the jumping session, that was the one thing that I really was surprised at. Children's inability to jump effectively, to land effectively. So in answer to that question, no, I don't think there's an order. I think there's an exposure to them all the skills. Pick out where they're deficient. Give a game with a real focus. This game is about lateral movement. We can only move backwards or sideways. So give them the opportunity, expose them to the skills, look at them, and then, okay, this is what I think we need to work on. So I hope that's the approach that I would use to answer that question. I think you just bias, if there's a deficiency, that's where the bias comes in my training. We're working on this. This is what I've seen. This is what I've noticed. A lack of ability to accelerate from standing, a lack of ability to slow down. So all the other skills are okay, but these are the ones that really stand out, and that influences my coaching sessions.
Perfect, Richard. Richard, I got lots of questions, but I'll let you move on and we can come back and revisit some.
Yeah, we're off to the zoo anyway, Paul. I think it closes soon, so I need to get in there soon. So we're off to the zoo. Okay. I went to a conference a few years ago, and I was at a presentation which was not the most dynamic, I have to say. And one slide came up, and it had animal games. And in that must have been the moment that I was awake the most, and I just was curious, what is the animal games? And they spoke, it was martial arts, spoke about the use of animal games in developing movement skills. And that was enough for me. That was the floodgates opened. And then I started to think about applying these movements to a game. Implicit coaching, young children. And if not just young children, I challenge anybody to think, well, adults are too old to play that. I've had more gorillas in my adult sessions than I've had in children's sessions. So not exclusively youth or young children, these are adults as well. So I thought some strong, powerful animals. I looked at the game. I used these animals to reinforce movement skills. I looked at the context of the game, the set piece play, the dynamic play. I thought, okay, let's try and get a session around this. So these aren't, so we got gorillas, strong, powerful, stable stance. That's our front row. The stance of a gorilla, the stance of the front row, stable, powerful, projecting real strength. We got crocodiles, functional movement. You know, if you think about young children, or again, I mustn't sort of think it's purely young children. You know, if you always form, we may get players who don't go to the gym, children who don't have access to the gym, children maybe not allowed to use the gym. Again, can we do some real functional strength training that is out of the gym, that is something we can integrate? Crawl like a crocodile develops those skills. You can see just from that picture the positions they find themselves in, and that movement, that the next movement will be from there into another dynamic, explosive movement back up into their feet. That crawling coordination of arms and legs. We got pigs to gorillas. It's a game I played where look at pigs who ultimately roll around in the mud at some point. So we roll around as a pig in the mud and we get back up to a gorilla. So it's something called sequencing. So it doesn't teach movement skills in isolation. So a little game you can play with to the players. You can have one player facing the other with a ball in between. They both roll down as they've been tackled. Who's first up to have a gorilla stance over the ball? So the ball brings in context because they've got a focus point. It gives that direction of movement. So I get up and I'm moving this way. So we stand, we fall, rolling around in the mud, back up to a gorilla. So it's really important we give them that implicit coaching cue. So we want a gorilla. You can see the front row, strong, powerful, anticipating, some confrontation. And who's the first up? So the sequencing is linking movements together, not in isolation, because ultimately a game will have multiple movements continually going on at any one time. I'm sorry I couldn't find a line out picture from Canada that would fit this screen, so I'm sorry you've got an England-Wales picture here. I'm not quite sure who won, but let's just say the white team inevitably won. But again, I'm not sure. So kangaroos, that powerful jump, that jump for height. But again, when we're coaching, we want to talk about players being lowered safely to the ground as in a line out. So we teach about safe landing in a stable base. We don't just teach the jump, we teach the jump and the land. So if I'm a fullback jumping up to catch a high ball, I can't be tackled in the air, but when I land, I've got to make sure I land safely, stable, because I could get tackled at any point. Like I said, from that separation, teaching on the England Rugby Coaching Award, fundamentals is a part of the program, as is the rugby side of it. And I think there shouldn't be that separation. It doesn't mean on the course there's not a separation, but I mean in our coaching there shouldn't be that separation. We shouldn't have an imbalance on one side. Can we integrate them? We're time poor. We have limited time with players. We have a long menu of things that need to put in there. Let's try and make sure that rugby movement fundamentals comes together at some point. So what I have used is this model really, which is a pathway. I call it a movement fundamentals within a pathway. One of the questions was, where do I start? What's the first thing I do? And that absolutely, that's a really important question, because if we're teaching something, there's got to be a start point. What's the first thing we begin with? And so we have this process which might help coaches and give them some guidance. Discovery. I'm going to go through these in turn, but this is to explain what they mean. But this is the 3 stages. Discovery. Young children, just let them discover that environment. Give them a ball. What does that ball do? How does it move? How does it roll? So it's play. It's informal. Then we move on to develop that. So we challenge them a little bit more. We give it a little more structure, a bit more guidance in what we want. So that's where education comes in. Sequences, that's the pig and the gorilla, and the progression is the stage from there. And the final stage, and it's really important, we've got the final stage there. Some people go straight to the final stage before they've done the previous 2. And that means the games become games. They have limitations. Remember, we mentioned about the transition from primary to in secondary education, that we're asking children to do more complex skills, but without the skills in their vocabulary to do them effectively. And context, really important as rugby coaches, that if somebody stopped the session and said, where would that be in a game, the players could answer it. So that giving that context supports the rationale for the activities you choose. A lot of work on one leg. If you look at a runner, there's only ever one leg in contact with the ground at any one time. So a lot of single leg balance is really effective. So a little bit more detail behind those 3 headings. Discovery stage. Going back to the question that was, really good question about where do I start? I mean, that sort of resonates more as you go through this presentation. Well, just do all of them. Introduce all the movements, whichever movements you look from the list that's available and the resources I have at the end for you, the list I showed you. The next one is high activity level. You can see that right the way through. Discovery, development, consolidate. Plenty of activity, keeping people moving, keeping challenging people. There's no reason for low levels of activity when movement skills are at the core of what you're doing, because the movement skills don't require, in most cases, anybody else. You can do these without relying on other people. But obviously, there's a situation where you will want people to come into it together. Agility work, you'll need to have somebody to evade, somebody to dodge, but plenty of activity. The next stage is cooperation with others. So can I do some activity we collaborate? You saw the musical chairs, without music. I've done it a few times, got some very positive feedback. So we run around as a group. There's no music because we're out in the field. I shout stop, indicate to the person who's, so everybody sort of sits. So what do you sit on? An imaginary chair? Great. So immediately we're getting that good sitting position, that tower of power as it's called, that gorilla position, that stable base. Now, when somebody's eliminated, they're not eliminated from the game, they've just lost their chair. So I need to find something to bind on with, to make a 1-man chair, a 2-man sofa. And somebody else gets removed, their chair removed. They've got to bind on to the person who've lost their chair and somebody else. So you now got a front row. You teach the bind. You teach that 3-man sofa actually becomes a front row, and gradually you move to so you've got groups of 3s, people without chairs, forming front rows. So it's just a light-hearted session, but it teaches that movement skill of balance, coordination, timing. Children want to work together, adults want to work together in sessions, as well as the bottom individual work. So we discovered this. We've given an environment where you could just give them a ball, just find out how it moves, challenge it. Okay, throw it in the air, catch it after you've done 4 claps, 5 claps. Can you just throw it into yourself with just your left hand, just your right hand? Can you pass it around your body? Can you pass it between your legs? Can you grab it in one hand and round your head, whatever it is, just explore what that ball does, what it's like to have it in your hand as you move. We then move on to the development. This is another important stage now. Things in isolation become sequenced. So we stand tall as the gorilla, we roll on the floor into a crawl as a crocodile, onto a back as a pig, back up as a gorilla, and then jump as a kangaroo to catch that high ball. So you've now got sequences, patterns that happen in the game. Level of importance. So that's when the level of importance says, well, this is important because, and you can start to highlight where that is in the game. So children understand the link of doing these skills and how they will serve them later on when they practice that. And the last one, this comes out countless times. The question about being brave to try new things and being vulnerable. It's often because the perception that, or the feeling that others have a perception of your sessions that there's something different, and different isn't good because it's not like the others. So create a dialogue between the parents. Tell them why you're doing what you're doing. One of the great things about this open dialogue with parents is if you set them a challenge. So this game 4v4, we're looking at how good your balance is. We're looking at how good you can stop. Can you stop in a short space? Can you try just passing the ball with one hand? Can you catch the ball with one hand? Whatever skills you put in there, that becomes a challenge and that becomes the measure of success. And by talking to the parents and talking to the children about this and to why you're doing it, it may stop that classic journey home. Did you score? Because the parents understand there's very different measures from just a score. They're looking at the success being your movement skills rather than whether you simply scored. And also you're coming from a really good position because you're saying to the parents, you look at the previous slides, the things about urbanization, lack of backyard games, lack of spontaneous play, lack of informal play, lack of, dare I say, safe risks, climbing, exploring your environment. So you're creating an environment that they may lack. And that's why you'd be really confident about that dialogue. And the final thing is consolidate them. Okay, so now we've got these skills. Let's put it into conditioned games. Non-linear. Rugby is not linear. It's not up and down. It's not like swimming down lanes in the swimming pool. And you can add that complexity. The complexity because they have that good vocabulary to then delve deeper into what you want them to do next. So I'm not sure if there's any more questions, Paul.
Yeah, we absolutely do. I'll squeeze a couple of questions that have came in.
Okay. Yeah.
How do movement fundamentals differ between structured versus unstructured play?
Okay, so if I'm taking it by structured play means that you're running a session where you might have you're working on set piece play from the base of a scrum going into backs moves, and you're running a session that has is that what that's
sure.
That clear by structured play? Okay. So unstructured play means you might have a game that is a multi-directional game or a game that is free play. So they're saying, right, just play. Okay. What you want to not give yourself the problem is by looking at those two situations, the structured play and the unstructured play, and thinking, there's so much here I need to feed back on. There's so much I'm seeing that I need to tell the players. What you must be aware of is that there'll be things you'll pull out from that. What is it you're seeing tactically? That could be support play. That could be accuracy of passing. That could be pressure in defense. But also there will still be those movement skills that may be lacking. And that could be acceleration off a line, defensive line, acceleration from a support play, the player coming off his wing. So it's about saying that either unstructured or structured, there'll always be something that you can feed back on. Don't be constrained by feeding back on movement skills or tactical, and technical. Just ensure that players are aware that the feedback you give in both those settings is developmental and is relevant. Because very often, if there's a breakdown in support from a structured game, well, have you looked at how that player moved? Have you looked at how were they standing when they suddenly were required to join the back line? They were flat-footed. Their hands were down by their sides. They couldn't accelerate. So one will always come with the other. So it's looking broadly at what happens in that structured game that can be enhanced by the reinforcement of those movement skills we spoke of earlier.
Okay, so question here. Because our young athletes are still growing, do you see a difference in movement skill from year to year, looking at between 10 years and 16 years old?
Yeah, there's certainly, if you look at the long-term athlete development model, is there are certain windows of opportunity where you need to challenge acceleration, challenge agility, decision making, and during that athletic growth phase, understand that there will be moments in that period where they will be less receptive to those, but more receptive. So measure your sessions, develop your sessions accordingly as that reference point. Understand that during those windows, that there will be things that you can do that are more effective, and things that you need to do, but also be aware of. But again, your expectations of somebody at 16 and your demands of somebody at 16 physically and physiologically should be different from somebody at 10. The problem comes when you're making expectations of somebody to do something at 10 when they could really developmentally only do it when they were 16. So it's actually ensuring that you've got appropriate practices for the appropriate development phase of that age group.
So I've got one more here. Is it better to have the sessions designed particular for each skill, or can we target 2 to 3 skills in the same time? For example, 20 minutes each, particularly skill sessions versus multiple skill sessions.
Yeah, I think that I found that to work on one particular skill, and we're talking about sequencing and nothing in isolation. I think that yes, you can work on balance, but balance will always come with something. So if we go back to, I think there's a slide to follow, this one here. So if you look at all of those and look in the middle at evasion, just say we're struggling at our footwork because we're taking too much contact. You're not avoiding contact. We work on evasion, but with evasion comes balance. And with balance and evasion comes twist, because you'll need to rotate. And you might need to roll out of contact. So you can actually design a session where all of these, will have some sequence with one another. There'll all be like a matchmaking one. If you're going to do acceleration, will you decelerate because you might need to suddenly change direction. So, I always think when you, I'm not saying don't do this. I have to say that speed sessions, pure speed sessions, working on that 5 meter, 10 meter burst of acceleration and deceleration, absolutely are critical to player development. But think about how much time we have, and when would you revisit that? Because you're only going to get better at things by revisiting them. And I think sometimes there's a feeling of we'll do speed today, but where do we do it again, and where do we do it again? Whereas if you integrate these in a pattern of training, it's a lot easier to revisit acceleration, deceleration, and evasion by just modifying a different game. that's what you're looking at, but the game that you've set, or the skill session you've set, is influenced by these particular elements. I'm trying to have an authentic and realistic look at this, that even at the elite level, how much time do you get with players? Where's a balance you can spend between these skills and the other demands in the game? So try and do sessions where you influence practice session design with these as the kind of pillars between what you're trying to do.
Perfect. I'll leave the rest of the question for later on, Richard, at the end.
Yeah, so I realise this. I realise the time as well. Not that I'm in a rush to go, but I realise that we have moved on quite quickly to the latter part. But I'm happy to field those questions. Paul, you can collaborate those, and happy to send them via email if that's better. Ones we don't get a chance to do. The discovery one, I've put on the left here all the movements. On the right, I've done the how. Give you a couple of examples. Hot lava, implicit coaching, running as though your feet are on hot lava, so get people to get off their heels onto their toes. Catch and clap, throw the ball in the air. How many claps can you make before you catch it? As an individual challenge. I've got get ups here. I think when I was playing, we did numerous sit ups and numerous press ups. But what happens in the game? Well, we can work on our abdominal strength and our rotational. When we sort of rotate and get up, if you look at a player and how they get up off the ground, the first thing they'll do is twist. So I look at a lot of players lying on the floor, getting up straight away into a balanced position. So those are much more functionally relevant, much more specific to the game, and you can then progress it. So you can get up off the floor into a balance, then move to a left or right, give them a stimulus to a direction of run backwards or run forwards. Lateral runs, that defensive shape. So just give players a challenge to play games. I mean, Mr. Freeze, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mr. Freeze as a game, not sure if it translates, but basically, players running around, you shooting out freeze, they're all going to stop absolutely dead still, and that challenges their balance and their ability to decelerate quickly. We mentioned the animals before. Points of contact, well, 2 hands, 2 feet. Just say, okay, let's have 2 points of contact. So they might go 1 hand, 1 foot, 3 points, 2 hands, 1 foot. So these are kind of games where you can discover what their competence is, and they can understand themselves how they are good at moving in those skills. That's the original list. These are some cues. I put some things like ouch, that's your hot lava, don't burn your feet. Shush, and that's your quiet landing, don't land like you're an elephant. Soften the blow, so absorb all that impact when you land, little cue. Reach, so it isn't about stopping sessions, it's about throwing these cues in while the session is going. So just throw them out there, what you're looking at heads up rather than our feet. When they stop, are you stable? So can you throw these things in during a session that are cues that stimulate the corrections you want them to make on the activities they're doing? We can develop these further. Coordination, multiple movements, push, jump, roll up, balance. I've got a picture here on the right of a sprinter. So I just played a simple conditioning game where we start in a press up prone position, hands on the floor, chest on the floor, legs on the floor, and just shout up. And what you'd already want is them up into a and pre-acceleration position. So both hands, arms straight, one lead leg forward, back down again, up, second lead leg forward. So you encourage them not to have a one dominant side when they accelerate from a prone position, because you work on both sides. This is a zone here where you got the rugby balls in the middle, and you get players to crawl out, collect one, roll back. So in with one movement, out with the other. This is a narrative. Children like learning through stories. So I don't know if you know that the British astronaut recently dropped a rugby ball down from space. So some of the young players had to reach up and catch the ball and throw it back up to him. Still didn't catch it. And they then jump up and catch the ball. So you use space as a trigger. It helps them to look up. So then you can reach, catch, land safely, put another player into it. Then you've got that challenge in the air. Can they land safely? So you've now got context, but you build it up from a simple throw in the air, reach and catch, jump up in the air, both feet off the ground, reach, catch and land and then turn, give them a direction of run. So throw the ball in the air, jump, catch, land, go left, go right. Bring a player in just to hover around them, not to challenge for the ball, but to give them that bit of peripheral vision. And then when you're ready, bring that player to contest the ball. But the space story is quite good for children because they understand the narrative. They can add bits into it. And the consolidation, the final part of it, you're ready for complex and conditioned games. 4 corner score, so I'm going to send Paul the game which you can access. You can have a look at that. 4 cones, 4v4, no running with the ball, only passing, score on a corner, ball back to opposition, can't score in the same corner. Okay, so we're going to condition it now. Every time you've passed it, roll on the floor back up. Every time you've passed it, jump in the air. Whatever it is, you can condition that around it to ensure that we're challenging the list of 11 things that we've seen. When you design a game, these are ones which we should all be aware of it when we're designing games, but obviously we've got our movement skill lens. So at the bottom it's conditioned. What conditions could you change that game with? What skill focus from the list? Where did you see there were deficiencies? Unpredictable environments are fantastic because that's what rugby is about, a chaotic environment and being able to move effectively in it. And purposeful, really important. The reason we're doing this is because small-sided games give you a really good chance to look at individuals and their areas of strength and weakness. Because they're involved more, their movement skills will be challenged more. So coaches, it's about reflection. We always reflect in our sessions. We reflect to ourselves. We reflect when we discuss it with others. We reflect when we talk to the players. What I saw in front of me, does that reflect what they're going to go into? Is it relevant? So my games reflect what they're likely to encounter at the weekend in their matches. If you look at those 2 pictures, on the right-hand side, we've got ball in one hand, pushing away a defender on one leg. You could put a touch line in there, so they've got actually a stimulus in order to ensure that balance is the player getting low, running in a low position in anticipation of making that tackle. You look at the picture on the left, we've got plenty of kind of stable gorillas you can see. So it's actually making a snapshot of a game and designing your movement skill sessions around that. What do I see in a match? How can I develop that? So I think there's some more questions, Paul. I know we're coming towards the end of it now. It's For me, it's flown by. But I'm really happy to take any more questions that there are for this evening.
Sure. So here's a good one that we have. That how would you combat parents that say, "I just want my kid to play rugby," and when do they need to specialise?
Okay, it's a good question because I think this dialogue with the parents is really important, and it's definitely not every parent, but some parents suddenly believe they are the coach, and there's that coach. The coach coaches me, and I sit in the car and I go home, and my parents coach me. And that's a real challenge. That's that real disconnect between the coach, the parent, and the child. And there's two messages going on. I think you have to really be confident and have conviction in what you're saying. I did a true false game with some coaches last week. They were given a true and a false card, and they had to say whichever one it was to another coach with real conviction. So they're saying things that they weren't true or weren't false, but the way he delivered it was important. They had to say whatever they had in front of them with real conviction. So there's no doubt. And I think when you get players, when your parents are saying, "But I just want them to play rugby," you need to say, "This is preparation. Without these building blocks, without these deeply rooted movement skills, the complexity of the game will find them out. And I have an obligation to prepare your son or daughter for the challenge of that game. And whilst it doesn't look like 15 v 15, if you look at how they move and look at how they're challenging them, I would ask you then to look at a game in real time and see how they transfer." I am not naive to it. I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but the way you deliver it is not necessary to go into a session that is so far different from what they're expecting that they'd inevitably ask questions. Is to gradually modify things bit by bit, drip feed these things in all the time, so it becomes the norm rather than an exceptionally different one. But have that dialogue. Have that dialogue with the child while the parents are nearby. My daughter's swimming lesson last week is brilliant because right at the end, "Right, kids, take your goggles off 2 lengths." "Why are we doing 2 lengths without goggles?" "Right, because you could fall into a river and you won't have your swimming goggles with you." So immediately, simple, but context. You can understand the rationale behind that. And I think those voices are not the majority. I think they are from people who don't understand what you're trying to achieve. Sorry, I've gone on quite long on that because that seems to be a recurring question all the time. It doesn't look like rugby. Well, that's because what we're doing is this, and that's really important. Sorry, I know there's another question there, Paul. Sorry, there's another second part to it.
Yeah, no. I will move on. No, that's really good. I'll move on to one more. What sort of things do you do to empower the players to give snapshots of the game that they want to work towards?
Okay, so when I asked you to do the shoelaces one, it's, I'm not saying everybody doing it, but it's quite interesting to do. If you can give them a challenge where they realize that the things they need to work on. So if you're saying to them, "I see this of you in a game," obviously that's important feedback. But what's also important is that feedback you give to them should in many cases not be a surprise because you've given them sufficient opportunity and self-awareness to know where those areas for development are. I mean, the bigger picture of the game is individualize the feedback where possible. Give them the tasks that you require in their particular role. Give them an opportunity to, in the sessions that you design, to work on those. So modify the game around the ones you want them to work on. give it an emphasis on support, pressure, go forwards, passing off both hands, whatever it is you want to work on them, and then ask them to reflect upon it, reflect upon the game that happened the previous week. So one of the things that I try to do is to ensure that the coach becomes less and less of the only voice, that the voice becomes two-way, because the dialogue is two-way, because the players understand, and you become the guide. So condition games to work on the skills that players have shown areas of weakness or development in the previous match. Reinforce it, challenge. What did you notice differently? Modify it. And I think if you ensure that every player has an opportunity to be in a session that reflects the role they'll have on the pitch, then you're providing them with that authentic learning experience.
Richard, I'm just cautious of time, and we do have some
Yep.
good questions that I will most certainly put to you, and we can put out as a response.
Okay.
So I'll let you move on.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm aware there's a lot of questions, and when I first did these webinars, an hour was it was daunting for me with an audience I couldn't see, and now we've gone over that. But I really appreciate everybody who's logged on tonight, and I hope it's been beneficial. I'm grateful for the engagement with their own development. The final slide that we shall see here is the first one. Show this to parents. Give them this in an email. Sport Scotland, 12 minutes, fundamentals of movement, one of the most popular one of the most popular coaching resources that UK Coaching and Sport Scotland put together. Your own coaching association, activeafterschool.ca, some fantastic lesson plans on movement skills. Brilliant. I looked at them today. Whole variety. These three things are things you could look up now. Have sessions for tomorrow. Have a little dialogue with parents. Have a look at this. This is what we're trying to achieve. And the last one, these are 2 textbooks which you might find useful. So I've tried to give you a variety of things that are easy accessible and free, alongside things that your club might want to buy a couple of copies and players to share. So for me, thank you very much indeed for listening tonight. I hope you've got some more confidence in the delivery of them, some more ideas for the delivery of them. And I know that Rugby Canada are really fantastic support in developing players across the country. So I'd like to thank them for engaging me in this opportunity. And as Paul says, any questions, there's my email and there, which you can go through Paul. You can field them to me, because there might be some themes, and you've got a Twitter account as well, which you might see some of the things that I post to help your learning as well.
Richard, just had a comment that comes through, and it kind of wraps up our thank you, but I will quote that some of the feedback was, this chap takes very complex issues and explains them in a concise, coherent and simple manner. And this is a genuine art and a skill, and a great session, and thoroughly enjoyable. So I think that is the best way I could sum up as a thank you for this session. Thank you to everyone that has logged on, and we will reach out to you for some feedback on the webinar, as well as making sure that you get the handouts and asking some of the or answering some of the questions that have been held in there. Thank you everyone for logging on. Thank you very much to Richard, and have a very nice evening wherever you are in the country or across the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you, and thanks for that final comment. That's much appreciated.